Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Benefits, a podcast exploring the flaws in our healthcare system and the people fighting to fix them. Today, we're going to talk about the cost of a wrong turn in healthcare and why our complicated and fragmented system is often to blame. I'm joined by two really talented guests today that have decades of clinical experience, plus really good perspective from both the employer and the member side. First up is Dr. Matt Resnick. He's the Chief Medical Officer and Senior Vice President of Health Plan Business at Embold Health, but he also serves as an Associate Professor of Urology and Health Plan Policy and still practices at the VA, where he continues his work on urologic surgical oncology. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
That is a mouthful, Chris. You did well, though.
Thank you. We're also joined by Dr. CJ Stimson, Executive Vice President of Population Health at Vanderbilt University. He's also a practicing cancer surgeon and associate professor alongside Matt at Vanderbilt. He's been a senior advisor to the front office at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Really glad to have you here today, CJ.
Great to be here, Chris. Thank you. Matt, great to see you.
Before we start the conversation, I want to set the scene a little bit, zoom out some. We all know there's lots of stakeholders involved in healthcare, right? We talked about this in prep. There's the employer, there's the person going through the healthcare journey. There's also the provider, the facility, the hospital. All of these stakeholders value different things, and it creates a system that doesn't always work optimally for everybody. I want to take a few minutes to talk about what actually matters and to whom. And so maybe, Matt, we can jump off with you. Do you mind sharing a little bit of perspective from the employer's viewpoint? You know, what are their top priorities? What do you think of from that lens?
Yeah, happy to, Chris. It's hard to open a newspaper or a website and not read an article about rising costs of healthcare and the implications for U.S. employers. So as we think about priorities for employers going through this journey at this moment in history, affordability seems like it's at the top of that list. And if we take a second to think about, well, what does affordability actually mean? It means two things. So, one is how to really control the plan spend. But two, most employers have a tremendous amount of empathy for their employees, right? And as we think about all sorts of different plan designs, employees often shoulder a significant burden of the cost for their care. And, it isn't just how do we, reduce our, corporate exposure, but it's also how do we deliver an experience to a member that actually doesn't materially change, in a negative way, their personal financial stability. So creating affordability for the employee that's going through care and their family. I'm sure we'll get to this, but I think the question then becomes, how do they do that? There's kind of multiple levers to pull, and we're starting to see different patterns of how different groups of employers are pulling those levers. But I would say, sort of out of the chute, that affordability is only one piece of the puzzle, right? If we think about most benefits teams, they care deeply about their people, and when we think about the human aspects of care delivery, I think the two that come to mind are, one is member experience. How do we make experiencing healthcare, as frictionless as possible? And the second is access, right? And access is a really interesting topic because it really means different things in different healthcare markets, right? In many rural markets, you can't find doctors. In many urban markets, there's a lot of doctors, but many of them aren't taking patients, or the wait times are really long, and that sort of brings up other considerations around delayed care. So, I just to sum it up, I would say affordability, member experience, and access, I think, are really the three that come to mind.
Yeah, that balance is really hard for employers. Maybe CJ, can you weigh in from your perspective, overseeing, a large member population at Vanderbilt? What do you see from the members' perspective?
Yeah, this is a great question, and Matt, I really like your framing. Um, I'm going to take a perspective, Chris. It's both from the you know 250, 300,000 lives that we manage here on our risk arrangements, but also just as a provider organization taking care of members, patients, people in our community. Um, I I think Matt's description of this as an experience issue is it really resonates with me. Um, you know, on the provider side, we tend to think of things in terms of quality, right? We have quality metrics. We have quality metrics that we manage. Um, but if you put yourself in the position of the patient who's receiving the care, it's fully the experience, right? You can call it quality, you can call it outcomes, you can call it whatever you want. But at the end of the day, the patient is saying, why is this experience so hard? That's that's where they're really struggling. And we have an obligation uh, as providers to make sure that patients are getting right care, right time, right place, and so forth. And we're trying to do that. But the experience side of this, I think, goes beyond that scope of what providers traditionally think about. And I think this is what's so interesting and exciting about Matt, what you're doing and what you're working on is you are bringing the experience perspective to the provider side, right? And that is not necessarily our instinct is to think about that full perspective. You talk about it as frictionless, right? Like
Mhm.
that is not the traditional healthcare
Right.
experience.
Right.
It really feels like healthcare for a member or a patient is almost like going to a foreign country,
Yeah.
right? It's like you show up in this very unfamiliar physical space that you don't even know where to park, right? Um, and and it's full of jargon and language that you can't understand. Um, the rules seem to be known by everyone around you but you, and it can really leave you like having this almost helpless experience. Mm. And so when we manage populations, we go after kind of traditional quality metrics. But what I just described, I don't I don't know that we're doing the best job of going after that experience. I think Matt, that's where what you're doing and what you're talking about, and even this podcast in general, it's really going after that question.
Yeah, CJ, I totally agree. And it's interesting. It's so hard sometimes to like, deconstruct the experience, right? But there's the, fear and anxiety around health, right? Whether it's yourself or a family member, right? Someone has no one, generally speaking, with, put wellness and kind of health maintenance aside, no one, seeks out going to the doctor. It's not like going to the movies or, going to a sporting event, right? It's you go because there's something that you're dealing with. So there's this bucket of like human being, emotion that's associated with this unfamiliar experience. And I love the way you describe that as a foreign country. I think it's like totally true. But then there's this whole other part that like isn't the care. It's, you could put it in like a bucket that's like financial slash administrative.
Mhm.
Um, that is it's insurmountable in many ways. I mean, I'll share with you. I literally I'm going through this right now. My son was prescribed a medicine. It went through prior authorization. It was denied. I got 3 letters that all said different things about like the reason for denial. The provider put did an appeal. The medicine was approved, and now I'm trying to figure out like if it's actually cheaper for me to just buy the medicine out of pocket or buy it through the farm. And fortunately for me, I actually one know something about this, but even still have someone who I can call, right? I work in Bold, and Bold is part of Quantum Health. Like we actually have access to those services. So, I have people who actually are expert in this who I've called help, right? And say, hey, look, like this is what I see. Is this right? Like, what would you do? Help me walk through this. And it's just part of the experience that feels to many who I think are, most candidly, who are not part of this world, like an insurmountable mountain to climb, with all of the other financial anxiety that sits on top of how am I going to pay for this, right? When it's something that's necessary for yourself or your family. So, I couldn't agree more.
It's a huge barrier. I mean, I know at Quantum, we do a lot of research to map out these member journeys. And one of the most common ones is the financial burden barrier, where we see they won't do anything until they know what it's going to cost in advance, right? They want to understand out of their pocket if they can afford the next step in their care. And yeah, it's a real persona out there. Maybe CJ, you can weigh in a little bit more from the kind of Vanderbilt perspective, the overall population health perspective. What, are there other stakeholders we're missing in this conversation? We talked a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about the member. Who else are we missing in this?
Well, I mean, we have the full boat of stakeholders have most have been mentioned. We have obviously the providers, the patients, um, employers, our purchasers, and then the payers, and I'll include in the payers the government side as well. Um, and so I don't know that we've talked about the payers as much so far on this, but the the payer dynamic is an interesting one, particularly on the commercial side. And I hope we get to kind of pull on this thread a little bit because um, I, in my role in population health, I'm oftentimes thinking in terms of payer relationships, right? Like those are critical to the work that we do. Um, but what role should the payers be playing? What are they incented? What role are they incented to play? How do they support their clients who are these plan sponsors? That that to me is an interesting question. I think it's one that the payers are evolving around as well, and I think we've seen different. Let's just call them models, right? Of of maturation, where some payers want to stick to kind of their legacy business model and approach, but other payers are recognizing that they need to bring more of a value proposition around the things that Matt and I have already talked about to support these employers and plan sponsors as they try to create a more frictionless experience for their patients. And so it's been fascinating for me to watch because we do some direct to employer work and interacting with consultants and brokers and payers and employers to see the different approaches that the payers have taken to this. Um, and it'll be even more fascinating to see who wins because someone's going to win
Yeah.
that race.
Yep. Matt, what's your
Yeah,
take on that?
it's as we're talking about this, I think, I hadn't really thought about this before, but CJ, I think you're bringing up this point, which is there's this space that isn't direct care delivery that we call population health, right? Which is
Mhm.
kind of managing, what I'll call the in between, right? The things that are either happening too much or not happening, trying to prevent things, adverse events from happening that are undesired for the patient and for whoever is paying, the plan sponsor, the health plan, the government. Um, and I think you're I agree with you 100% that there's this like, continuum of approaches
Mhm.
that have been tried. And I don't in many ways, part of that is, you know, we're fitting a model that almost feels like somewhat modular to this space that is hyper complex. And I think that
Mhm.
there's like a bunch of, I mean, if you think about all the stakeholders, everyone's playing a role in that, right? So if you think about for Vanderbilt and, 250, 300,000 lives that you all, manage on a risk basis, right? You feel like you have responsibility for managing this sort of ambiguous space in between healthcare events, right? My guess is for the patients, the 2.5 or 3 million, however many patients that aren't, under your purview, they don't have the luxury of whatever the services that you provide are
That's
to
correct.
optimize population health. So who takes that on, right? Is that a health plan? Is that the employer, through a surrogate like a Quantum Health or others? Is that, it feels like there's non-uniformity in the space that, in many ways, like allows for this, kind of continuum of approaches, which candidly, from a like an academic perspective, makes it really hard to know what's working really well and what's not working really
Right.
well, because like
Yeah.
these things aren't randomly distributed, right? Like they're sort of allocated intentionally. So anyhow, I say that just to say, I agree with you completely that there's There's delivery. You go to the doctor, you get an MRI, you get the results, you make a plan, that plan is executed. There's the costs associated with that. But then there's all of this work that's critically important work that happens around all of those events that has to be allocated, right? Or in an ideal world would be allocated, to a set of individuals like what you're doing. And I think that there's an opportunity potentially to really rationalize that, and make it as effective as possible.
I think that's right. And to me, it feels like there's going back to kind of a foreign land, right? There's this unexplored wilderness, which is the space that you're describing. Um, I feel like there is this like land grab that is going on now where various
Sure.
types of entities are kind of rushing into that area and trying to figure out how to turn that wild land into something that can generate value, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
um, that it, that to me says that we have a real problem,
Yeah.
right? Because investment is following that problem because it's a real and interesting problem.
Yep.
And we don't have it solved. Like you said there's a continuum, and that's absolutely right. I what I worry about is, if there's 160 million people who are covered by their employer, something like that, right? Like a very significant number. My worry is that employers, um, they may not be equipped to really be leading that charge into that kind of untilled land, right?
Hmm.
Um, but they need to, they need to, like, they hold the risk, like their
Yep.
members rely on them. And so who do they turn to? Right. To be candid, like we're trying to be someone they can turn to.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
And so are many others. But I, I think it's important for them to look at that. And many are. I don't want to sound like lots of employers are not doing that. Many are. But when you're just trying to run your business, it's it's a tall ask.
Yeah.
It's a tall ask.
Well, especially you guys brought up the fragmentation and it. There's pockets of data throughout all of these different stakeholders, right? So from that academic perspective, Matt, you referenced, there's no clear articulation of the entirety of what's going on, right, in one source. So it's really hard to track down and understand the risk and manage the risk if it's so fragmented, right?
Yeah, I think Chris, you're right. And it's like when you think about fragmentation, it's like it's fragmentation of data, but it's also fragmentation of populations,
Hmm.
Yeah,
right? Like if you think
yeah,
about the
good point.
continuum, we like to, this is just human nature. We all think about like ones and zeros, black and white, employer or, Medicare or Medicaid, but the reality is that like employers look really different, right? A
Hmm.
100-person employer looks really different than a 1.5 million life employer, right? And that, Chris, like I think that means a lot of different things. It means geographic dispersion, right?
Yep.
So, CJ, like I fully understand, but for a company that has outposts across the United States, their challenges are very different than, a local business that like has folks that are primarily 90% plus located in a single place. Um, and I think it also is resourcing. I mean, Chris, this is something, I suspect candidly you see every day in the job you do every day is like, look, there's different different employers have different size teams. They have different
Yep.
prioritization associated with benefits innovation and, trend management. And for that reason, they have different abilities to sort of take on these initiatives.
Yeah.
And I think we are starting to see that in, how different employer segments are approaching affordability. And that's not
Mm.
to say that affordability isn't important. I actually think that like in some way that's the foundation. Everyone is feeling pain right now in terms of rising costs of healthcare. That is impacting businesses. CFOs are becoming increasingly involved in benefits purchasing decisions because it's a business problem, right? It's a
Yep.
budget that needs to be managed more aggressively because it's creating budget shortfalls. Um, And at the same time, right, people are asked to do more with less. So the question that's
Yeah.
it's becoming interesting is, if affordability is the end goal, married with experience, like what are the tactics that we're taking to go from here to there? And are those tactics different depending on, where in the, what segment an employer is in? And I think the answer is yes, without question.
Yeah. I even think, I mean, even within an employer, right, you could have very different populations. So you have a headquarters, a distribution center, a retail population. Those are three very different types of healthcare
Yep.
consumers in different places with different needs and different priorities, right? At different levels of healthcare literacy. It's all interconnected. And I really like your point about the HR and benefits teams, right? I mean, I think a lot of our employers know what they need to do and know they need to have like a pointed strategic strategy for these different populations, but they're running so lean to have the time to do that and navigate this all on their own is a very difficult task too, right?
I will say I do think though, so yes, to the segmentation and that we need tailored solutions. Employer size makes a ton of sense to me. Um, but I want to just call out, and maybe we can debate this, that ultimately in that last mile, the activity feels very similar to me. And what I mean by that is, um, like these members, our patients,
Yep.
um, they all need help navigating the system and how we get those. Matt, to your point, like the channel by which those tactics arrive to those members may be wildly different based on the set, large employer, small employer, mid-size, geographic location, rurality, urban, like all of that. I think ultimately at the end of the day, there's a very common experience that needs to happen um, for these members to
Yeah.
have the affordability and to have the experience that I think we all want. And maybe that gets us to the steerage question. I don't know, but I think there's a very common set of needs there for these folks.
Yeah. Agree. Matt, what do you
Yeah,
think?
CJ, I agree with you. I mean, I think the question is when and how,
Hmm.
right? I think as we're thinking about this journey, um, historically, the way that human beings have interacted with healthcare and healthcare organizations is like hyper reactive. Or if you just like think about, when you or I or Chris, log into whatever portal, we use historically for a health plan, it's typically because like you want to look at an EOB or something, like you're confused about the way that a price was arrived at. Maybe you're adjudicating a network status for a provider that you're going to see some version of that, right? Like it's you've kind of made a choice and you're going to like adjudicate that choice. Like there's some
Sure.
look back that you're after. I
Yep.
think what's interesting is what I'm starting to see is an appetite for like proactivity.
Mm,
And I mean
yes.
that, along multiple lines, but less so clinically, meaning, less so, preventive care and, health maintenance, and more so, CJ, I think where you were going, it's like, how do we get as upstream as possible in this journey and help someone like navigate to the right
That's
place,
right. That's
right? Like
right.
whether that's
That's
a
right.
Amen.
provider, whether that's a virtual care solution, whether that's a dietitian, whether that's a physical therapist, like, and it just feels like we're at this moment where, there's more data than we've ever had, right? Like data sort of democratized. Our ability to leverage that data with like, computing power, is greater now than it has ever been in the past, right? So, I think what we're seeing is this moment where we can, really quickly advance our intelligence around, how we optimize on multiple factors, right? And maybe it makes sense to sort of dig into what those factors might be. But I think this like historical, at least from my perspective, tension between quality and cost, right? There's always this like sort of, hey, like you got to pay more to
Yeah.
get high quality care. Like I actually think that's changing. Like I think there's an opportunity here to say, hey, look, like no, it's not either or, it's actually an and, right?
Hmm.
And we can dig into how we can do that, but it just feels like we're in this sort of like watershed moment where there's a need from an affordability perspective. There's the ability from kind of an analytics and data science perspective. And there's a willingness, an appetite, again, back to the affordability mandate, for folks to start using some of this like sort of advanced tools and technology in a way that's like different than it has been in the past, where I'm starting to see this emerge as like an alternative path, meaning I think historically we've got like a handful of levers to pull. Like you can, do more prior auth and utilization management. We can really tighten up networks. We can, like get more aggressive on, the provider contracts to get a better, kind of discount or unit price. I just am seeing this growing, I don't want to say cynicism, but it's kind of cynicism, in the
Yeah.
market around like the effectiveness of those things. So I think there's
Yeah.
this like appetite for like a white space. It's like, hey, what can we do that's like kind of foundationally different than what we've been doing before? Because like if those things were super effective, like I don't, I think
We
there's a
wouldn't be here.
be where we are now, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. I really think, Matt, that you're right, that there is there are some legacy levers here that the market has grown wary of because they're clearly ineffective. And I've even thought like we need to rebrand steerage. Like that word is just that's
Tainted.
it's the wrong
Yeah.
word, right? Like
Name.
people they don't want to feel like they're being denied something that they would otherwise choose to have. And to me, that's what like the historical steerage lever has felt like, right? Like there's a denial that is happening here. That's what all of those levers feel like. We're denying you something that you would have otherwise, like your son, right? Like we're going to deny you this medication. Um, but what they really want is, and I think this is what you're describing, and it's not that all that different from steerage, is they want guidance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They want it to be guided, and they want credibility. So I think they would be willing to accept steerage. We'll figure out navigation. They would accept that if the way they experienced it was help and not restriction. And I think that, you know, if you can say to a member like, we're going to deploy this tool, and the way you interface that with that tool is here's the next best step for you, and by the way, we're going to facilitate that next best step and make it really easy. That's like steerage, like 5 point, I don't know what version we're on of steerage, but like that's where it goes next. That's where it should go. Because the employers are like, I don't want steerage. It's going to create backlash, friction, all of that. It's going to break trust and generate phone calls. But that's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking about something that advances to what you're describing.
Yeah, CJ, I could not agree more. I think I think you hit on something that you actually hit on two things. And I think for some of these steerage solutions to be effective, they actually have to do one of two things, preferably both. Right? They either have to help or they have to make it easy. And preferably they help and make it easy.
I'm writing
Right?
that down.
I mean, it's like it's interesting because we can use any number of examples, but like, why do all of us buy more things on Amazon than we need? Right? It's like it's because it could not be easier. Like you don't have to type
Yeah.
in your credit card every time. Like you just have to like look for the random thing that you don't need that costs like $13.99 and then swipe once and like it's at your house the next day or the day
It's a
after,
little
right?
too
So
easy.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's this kind of consumer behavior that like all of us have grown to expect. Like that's the funny
Yes.
thing is that we're not like we sort of have an expectation in our regular lives that things are really easy. And then you enter like the healthcare domain And like, it's the exact opposite. You can't generally get someone on the phone. When you get
Yep.
someone on the phone, like the likelihood that they're going to resolve your problem in that call is like next to none. You have to get bounced around. You even when people talk to you and you're not expert in this, like it feels like they're speaking back to your foreign country example. It feels like they're speaking a foreign language. Like none of it's easy and none of it helps. And I'm being dramatic here, but I think you're right. Because there's this mountain to climb, this like activation energy of like general distrust of the system.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I mean, I think that I think, look, everyone has different opinions of some of the health plans. Like I actually think, the health plans generally are trying to do their best to like do the things that they're charged to do. And what's interesting is they do a lot of good work, and oftentimes I see that it's hard for people to like engage it because I think there is just this like blanket, they're after something that isn't in my best interest,
Hmm.
which, again, like I don't fundamentally believe that, but it's really, CJ, I think you nailed it. I mean, the more we can make this easy and the more we can just help people,
Hmm.
accomplish their basic tasks, schedule an appointment, get an answer to their
Right.
question, like find, hey, like what's the easiest path for me to get physical therapy? Is it like Hinge Health on, virtual, or is it like go to Results Physical Therapy that's like, half a mile from my house? Like whatever it is, like just make it so that it's like you just can close that event in one little session on your phone or on your computer or tablet or whatever it might be.
It's painfully simple, and you're right. I think at Quantum Health, we're seeing in the last year, we've seen a 20% increase in kind of self-guided exploration of
Mm,
trying to understand the benefits. And I mean, the time is now, and I think the consumer behavior is shifting to want to be more informed, to want to do the right thing. They just need the someone to help connect the dots. I thought we do every podcast, we do this portion of it where we do myth versus reality, and I've got a good one for you guys here. So bear with me as we play this little game. But um, myth versus reality, CJ, we'll start with you. More and more employers are trying to steer members to care. Do you think that's accurate?
so my experience with, and again, we'll use steering in this latest iteration that we've talked about. Um, I see a differential uptake on this based on what Matt had described before. That there's a segmentation that has occurred where um, larger organizations, likely with more staff, more
Hmm.
experience, perhaps more confidence, perhaps more consultants, um, that they seem to be embracing th- this approach, this new approach of steering more aggressively than others. That
Yep.
being said, so yes, large employers, but like Matt said, I can't solve a lot of like large employer problems directly because I'm not geographically distributed. But for everyone else, I still see a lot of reluctance around
Hmm.
this because of the backlash that I talked about before, the fear of the friction, and I don't want to say that that fear is unfounded
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
is. That's not at all what I'm saying. So I don't want to. It's not like they're misunderstanding their reality of the last many decades. Like it is a very founded fear,
Sure.
but I think the consumer preference, as you described, Chris, and as Matt described, I think it's evolving. So is it myth or reality? I think it is reality for some, but myth for most. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know, Matt. I don't know if you agree with that.
I agree to some extent.
Hmm.
Chris, I would say it's a reality. Um, I think if we get back to this like kind of first principles of, hey, look, if we all believe that employers, generally speaking, are focused on affordability, like if we get a line that is a truth, right?
Yeah.
I think what we're
Agree there.
seeing is that, the sort of larger geographically dispersed employers have a belief that, steerage based on quality, right, will drive cost reduction through outcome optimization, waste reduction, et cetera. And we've seen that that is true, right? Like we have, like we've worked with large employers, like we've looked at data, like our results actually would demonstrate that that is the case. I think as you sort of go down market into mid market, smaller employers, I think the like kind of veracity with which they grab onto this sort of quality driven cost reduction strategy gets lower. But I do think that they are seeing steerage, and particularly steerage tied to plan design changes, as an opportunity to create
Mhm.
stronger incentives and disincentives for people to do behaviors that the plan desires, right?
Yep.
And again, back to like the this concept of like we're out. Like there's only so many things we can keep doing and like not see improvement. I think people are looking to this what I would call steerage bucket as a like an under leveraged value store. So I what I would say is like it's hard to find a large employer that like isn't focused on this in some way, shape, or form, and it takes different like it's called different things. It's called alternative health
Yep.
plans. It's called navigation. It's called, digital navigation. It's called, primary care oriented health plans, right? Like it's called a variety of different things in some way, shape, or form. Like it's steerage, right? And there's
Yeah.
a quality component. And I think that, that just gets a little looser down market. But I do think that the brokers and the consultants are starting to see this as a space where they can offer optionality to their clients to sort of like source value that like otherwise was untouched. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's real, and I think to CJ, to your point, it just looks different depending on where you are in that continuum.
I like what you said earlier, CJ, too. It's, it's almost like we need to rebrand steerage to guidance or some other
Something.
term because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. I would like to, as we close out here, I'd like to start or zoom in a little bit on the employer angle and give them a real call to action. Like, what steps should employers be talking about right now? 1 year from now,
Mm.
name two things every employer should be doing to ensure members are getting the best and most appropriate care. Matt, we'll put you on the spot first.
um yeah, I'm gonna take three things and smush them into two. So
Let's hear it.
one, I think employers talking to their members and actually getting a sense of how they experience care finding today. Like what are they doing, right? I mean, are they
Mhm.
using the assets that are in front of them? Are they talking to family? Are they talking to friends? Are they talking to HR? Like having a sense qualitatively about like what actually is happening. I think the second is mapping that against what they want, right? Like if you have like ideal state and you have reality, like where are those things overlapping and where are they not? And then like identify one or two places in that journey where they can make an impact, and then think about what are the highest leverage ways to make that impact, right? I think,
Mhm.
anytime I have a conversation with a person looking for care, and, Chris, like this is what Quantum does and Embold does like every day, it always is really interesting to me how the journey happens, like even before they see a provider. So
Yep.
like I just think getting a perspective that is real and honest and human about how people are doing this and where their friction points are and how they can better align that to what's desired is really like an opportunity to see, hey, here's what we can do, and then figuring out, all right, what's on the table and what's going to work best for us to drive improvement, along the lines of member experience and affordability.
I love that. Great answer. CJ, can you match that one?
I don't know that I can match it. I've never been able to
Just
match
eclipse it.
Matt.
You can just eclipse it.
So I can, but I'm happy to follow in his wake. Been doing that for years. Um, um, I what I would encourage employers to do is, you know, to all the employers who maybe don't have the confidence or the expertise in house, I would encourage them to push their trusted advisors on this. Right? They have a set of trusted advisors, typically consultants or brokers. Push them on this question, um, because I think it's a lot to ask for someone who's just trying to like run benefits and compensation and like keep,
Yep.
retention and productivity, like it's a lot. So most people have these folks on their team, push them, right? Ask them to come back with you with something. And then the second thing on the heels of that is embrace a pilot, right? It,
Yeah.
it's
Great.
it's okay to experiment if the experiment is bounded well and understood by the stakeholders. And I think that is a little bit novel in the kind of the benefits space, but I think that between the stakeholders we've all talked about today and what the members are looking for, that I think there'd be a lot of appetite for that.
Absolutely.
Um, so yes, push your broker, push your consultant to bring something that could be kind of a different lever for you,
Hmm.
and then pilot that thing and just see how it goes.
It's excellent. I can't thank you both enough for joining us today in this conversation. Want to give you both a moment for final thoughts, kind of sum up what we talked about today, or anything else you want to make sure that the audience hears before we let you go. CJ, any other final thoughts?
I just want to make sure that employers understand how critical they are to moving the system into a better arrangement. I know they've got a lot on their plates, right? They carry a lot in their communities. Um, well, healthcare is there too. And as a provider, I need employers to push us, right? I
Hmm.
need them to create that urgency and that burning platform. I don't know that they understand how much influence that they have, but it's significant. And I want them to know they have that and to exercise it.
Excellent. Thank you, CJ. Matt?
No, I love that. I think it's easy to get down on this topic, right? It's easy to sort of say, gosh, like nothing's working and sort of like have a glass half empty kind of view of this world. I think there's a lot of great work that's happening right now, and I think there's a lot of work that could drive substantial impact for providers, for employers, and for members. So, I would leave just with a sense of, I love CJ what you said about, experimentation and pilot. Like, how can we, test and learn quickly? And when there are, programs that seem to be working, with clear outcomes in mind, like how do we then scale this? So, the only other thing I would say is one of the things that has been, I would say, perhaps one of the most rewarding of my time at Bold is to watch employers and providers collaborate. Because it's really interesting when an employer and a provider group get in the same room, what's very clear is they actually share the same goals. Like, everyone is after the same thing. And when you
Hmm.
sort of like take the armor off and just like have a conversation about what you're after for the employer for their employees and their families and for the providers for their patients, like it's remarkable how much alignment there is. And I think there's an opportunity to think through how we systematize that, that those relationships. And I don't have a vision for what that looks like. All I know is that there's wisdom and there's power in that.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can support that with honesty and data and transparency, I think the better, like the more powerful that synergy will become.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough for your wisdom and perspectives today, CJ and Matt. Really appreciate your time. For all you listeners out there, we're just getting started. If you like this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching and listening, and we'll see you back here in a couple weeks.